The Pixel 11 has just been announced, and I don't think Google really upgraded the Pixel this year. Now, before you start typing in the comments, hear me out. It feels like Google took the Pixel 10, polished a few things, added some new AI tricks, put some lights on the back, and then asked us for another $100. And that's what I want to talk about today. Because the Pixel 11 isn't necessarily a bad phone. In fact, it's probably going to be a very good phone. The question is it actually worth upgrading to? And more importantly, is it worth the extra money? So let's start with the phone itself, because if I'm being completely honest, my first impression of the Pixel 11 is, this looks very familiar. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Google has been refining the Pixel design for a few generations now, and the Pixel 11 continues that philosophy. The phone is cleaner, the camera bar is slimmer, the overall design has been refined. And Google has made a few changes that should make the phone feel a little more polished. But if you put the Pixel 10 and Pixel 11 next to each other, I don't think most people are gonna look at the two phones and immediately say, wow, that's a completely different phone. And I think that's important because we're now at a point where smartphone design has become incredibly mature. Samsung isn't reinventing the Galaxy every year, Apple isn't reinventing the iPhone every year, and Google isn't reinventing the Pixel either. The difference is that Google seems to be leaning particularly heavily into software and AI this year, and that's where the Pixel 11 starts to get interesting. The Pixel 11 comes with Google's new Tensor G6 chip, and yes, it's faster, as it should. Gemini is becoming a much bigger part of the Pixel experience. There are new AI-powered features, and these features are cool. I'm not gonna pretend they're not. But here's my problem. AI has become Google's answer to almost everything. New camera, AI. New software, AI. And at some point, I have to ask, what happens when the AI improvements become incremental too? Because if the Pixel 10 already gave you an incredibly smart phone, how much more smart does the Pixel 11 actually need to be? And that's where I think this generation becomes less exciting. Let's talk about the cameras. We're still looking at a 50 megapixel main camera paired with a 48 megapixel ultra-wide and a 48 megapixel telephoto camera. So on paper, the megapixel numbers haven't suddenly gone crazy. Because this is Google, they have never really needed to win the megapixel war. The Pixel's camera advantage has traditionally come from what Google does after you press the shutter. Computational photography, HDR processing, night sight, zoom processing, and now, increasingly, AI. The Pixel 11 continues that approach. You can look at those numbers and think, wait, 50 megapixels, 48 megapixels, is that it? But that's missing the point. Google isn't necessarily trying to give you bigger numbers. It's trying to make the numbers it already has work harder. But at the same time, this is another reason why I don't think the Pixel 11 represents some massive camera upgrade over the Pixel 10. So if you're upgrading from the Pixel 10 purely because you think the Pixel 11 suddenly has dramatically better camera hardware, save your money and stick with the Pixel 10. Let's talk about the display. It's more of the same story when it comes to the displays on these new Pixel phones. The screens are just a tiny bit brighter, up to 3600 nits. For comparison, the Pixel 10s were already pushing 3300 nits. Everything else about it is basically the same. And this is where things get a little weird. Last year, Google gave the Pixel 10 Pro 16 GB of RAM as standard. This year, the base Pixel 11 Pro comes with 12 GB of RAM. Now, before somebody says 12 gigs is more than enough, yes, it probably is, but that's not really the point. The point is that Google went from 16 gigabytes to 12 gigabytes on the base Pro model while increasing the starting price. The Pixel 10 Pro launched at $999. The Pixel 11 Pro starts at $1,099. That's another $100. Now, to be fair to Google, there is an important detail here. You see, the Pixel 10 Pro started with 128 gigs of storage, while the Pixel 11 Pro starts with 256 gigs. So Google isn't simply charging us $100 more for exactly the same configuration. We're getting twice the base storage. That's a legitimate upgrade. But still, why reduce the RAM? Especially when the entire Pixel 11 story is about AI. Google is telling us that these phones are becoming more intelligent, more capable, and more dependent on on-device AI. So naturally, I would expect the Pro model to either maintain the same amount of RAM or increase it, not go backwards. And that's probably my biggest question about the Pixel 11 Pro. What exactly happened to the 16 gigs? Well, what else changed? The battery is now slightly better, same with charging speeds. The camera bar is slimmer, and there are new colors to the lineup. That's about it. So what's my final verdict about these phones? Well, I don't think it's a particularly exciting upgrade, because while the jump to 256 gigs is genuinely welcome, I'm still questioning the decision to put 12 gigs of RAM in the base Pro model while keeping 16 gigs for the more expensive configurations, especially when the entire pitch of this generation is built around AI. And that's where I think Google has given us something to talk about, because maybe the Pixel 11 isn't about how much Google upgraded the phone. Maybe it's about how much Google thinks those subtle upgrades are worth. And at $1,099, that's a conversation worth having. Let me know what you think in the comment section. And as always, if you enjoy our content, please like, share, and subscribe. Bye for now.